Good morning and welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our next session, Smarter Energy Infrastructure for a Sustainable Future. If time allows, at the end of this session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR code that is located on the screens around the room. Please be sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the conversation and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Sally Brown Richardson of the Tulane University School of Law.
Thank you so much. We're excited to have this panel today on infrastructure and sustainability. And I am joined today by really four experts who are going to be able to talk to us from a very different perspectives about sustainability and really building smarter energy infrastructure. Today we're joined by Rob Guthrie, the CEO of Bernhard, Stephen Swiber, the Chief Resilience Officer in the Office of Governor Jeff Landry, Andy Kowalczyk, the Director of Transmission for Southern Renewable Energy Association, and Eric Skrmetta from the Louisiana Public Service Commissioner. So one of the things we want to do to start is introduce everyone to you so you understand what is it that all of these panelists do that really is focused in their jobs on sustainability and infrastructure. So if we can start, and Rob, I'll start with you. Yeah. Just if everyone gives kind of 2-3 minutes, what do you do in your job that is focused on sustainability and energy infrastructure?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. I'm Rob Guthrie. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Bernhard. We are one of the largest privately held energy and infrastructure firms in the U.S. We've got about 2,500 employees all across the country, and notably, we are headquartered here. So our headquarters are here in Metairie. About 40% of our workforce resides here in the state of Louisiana. So Louisiana has been and will continue to be home. Our business, to answer your question, you kind of think of Bernhard as being divided into two sides. The first side is what we call energy services, which is what we would refer to as kind of legacy or traditional services that we offer. This is mechanical construction, mechanical engineering, electrical construction, electrical engineering, asset management services. So we do a lot of operation and maintenance work on energy infrastructure. Those are services we've done for the last 105 years. Our history goes all the way back to 1919. Those are typically offered unbundled. They're offered a la carte. They're offered on more of a sort of fee-for-service basis. So that's one side of the house. The other side of the house is where our Energy as a Service, or EAAS, solution resides. We've only been doing EAAS for about 10 years. And EAS is a broad term, but how we think of it is it's a transaction where, first of all, we sort of harness all the disciplines that exist within Bernhard, and we bring those resources to bear to deliver to the customer a turnkey experience. And when we're doing an energy as a service project, we are first and foremost monetizing the customer's energy infrastructure. I'm happy to get into that if somebody wants to talk about how we do that. So we're bringing the capital to the transaction. We're more often than not undertaking a very comprehensive design build project up front that is designed to optimize the customer's energy performance, address deferred maintenance, reduce their GHG emissions, and typically it has a guarantee to the customer that a certain amount of energy consumption will be reduced by virtue of the projects that we're implementing. So that's part of it. The other part is because we are taking on this responsibility on the customer's campus, there's typically a very pronounced transfer of risk related to energy infrastructure from the customer to Bernhard over a long period of time. So most of these EAS partnerships are 20 to 30 years, and we're taking on risks that many of our customers consider non-core to their operations. And we're doing all of that in a way that is structured or designed to preserve the customer's balance sheet and preserve their debt capacity for core business pursuits in the future. So that's a mouthful, but that is really how we think of EAS. That segment of our business, again, is only 10 years old. It's grown at a very healthy clip, particularly over the last 7 to 8 years. We've had a lot of success with it. We have largely geared it toward large institutional tax-exempt customers, and we've had a lot of success in New Orleans. So LCMC Health is a long-term EAS partner, Ochsner Health, University of New Orleans, and most relevant for this discussion, Tulane University is probably one of our more flagship partnerships. We launched a 30-year EAAS partnership with Tulane in January of 2022, and we are very proud of the role that we play as a partner to the university, not only from an operational perspective, but also, as a long-term stakeholder in the New Orleans community. We look for every opportunity we can to support Tulane and its long-term mission. So, again, very excited to be here today.
And I can say Bernhard is working on the Tulane Law School roof. We're really happy about working on the Tulane Law School roof. All right, so Andy, we had someone who's working on kind of project management and doing different projects. From your perspective with the transmission of Southern Renewable Energy Association, what are you doing in terms from your job for looking at smarter energy infrastructure and sustainability?
So thanks for having me here first. My name is Andy Kowalczyk. I'm the Transmission Director for Southern Renewable Energy Association. We are a nonprofit trade group that represents wind, solar, energy storage, transmission developers, as well as commercial loads. So we recently welcomed Google into our membership. So they fit really well because they have clean energy goals and meeting 24/7 access to clean energy. So my role in the role of a transmission director is engaging in transmission planning. And we refer often to our transmission grid as the backbone of the American economy. The transmission grid transports high volumes of electricity from where it's generated to where it's consumed, whether it's through economic centers like manufacturing centers or data centers, to this university, to homes. It enables a modern way of life, and it creates economic prosperity. The way that this grid is planned is not an accident. It's very methodical. There is your yearly maintenance kinds of projects, which are focused on local reliability, usually within utility territories. Then there are interconnection projects, which there is both interconnecting load, which happens really quickly when you're interconnecting new manufacturing facilities or data centers, or you're connecting new renewable energy projects or gas projects. This requires studies to see what kinds of transmission upgrades are needed to deliver electricity from where it's produced to where it's needed. And they're typically shorter term, and they're focused on getting energy online. But the problem is that we're reaching a point where things are happening very fast, and there is a greater need for regional reliability. So this is looking at leveraging options from a much larger space, maybe over multiple states, where you can leverage getting access to cheaper options for electricity, as well as just having a more stable grid over a larger footprint. So we are engaged right now in planning discussions that are looking at 20, 40 years into the future to see what kinds of changes are going to happen on the grid to skate to where the puck is going to be, to use the Wayne Gretzky phrase.
All right, so we've now heard from different folks. We just talking about the grid, moving into more regulators and policymakers. Stephen, in the governor's office, what are you doing really on sustainability and energy infrastructure?
Thanks. So for those who don't know me, I'm Stephen Swiber. I'm with the Office of Governor Jeff Landry, where I am the Chief Resilience Officer. And for those of you who might not be familiar with that role, as I wasn't until I assumed it, the Chief Resilience Officer in Louisiana really grew out of the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities. So for the past several years, it's really been a kind of coastal and environment-focused role. But in 2023, the legislature moved the role out of the Office of Coastal Activities and into a standalone office of one person, which means I don't have any assistants. But it is now more focused on resilience as a statewide concept, as a whole of government approach, as kind of a resilience conscience that can go into our projects, into our policies. And when you hire somebody into that role who's a graduate of the A.B. Freeman School of Business, Masters of Management in Energy, you could ask Professor Smith over here about that if you're interested. And don't be surprised when that takes on a little bit of a energy and grid sort of focus. So the executive branch in Louisiana has traditionally had constitutionally absolutely zero role when it comes to electricity outside of maybe some permitting for site-specific environmental issues, but nothing really specific to electricity in the grid. That's changed somewhat with IRA, IIJA, and the sort of maxing of the federal credit card. We have a lot of programs now that have to run through a state office of energy. So we've now created a state office of energy that sits within the Department of Energy and Natural Resources, formerly just Natural Resources, where we'll be spending a lot of these dollars at GRIP, which is Grid Resilience Innovation Program, P, and some energy efficiency dollars, appliance rebate dollars, are all be kind of running through that office. So in that way, we now sort of have a role. So now we hope to we're working with the Public Service Commissioner, the actual constitutional regulator and ultimate arbiter of energy issues, to align our administration and our policies, and working with the legislature to align our laws to these emerging technologies, because as you pointed out, Andy, things are changing very, very quickly.
All right, and last but not least, the PSC, the ultimate regulator of all of this. Eric, why don't you share from the PSC's perspective what y'all are doing for energy infrastructure and sustainability?
Everything. That's the easy way of putting this. The Public Service Commission is an actual constitutional body, the only constitutional public service commission in the country. And we are tasked with being the legislative, judicial, and executive one-stop shop for how we are going to plan, implement, and pay for all energy, electric services in the state of Louisiana. But not just that, natural gas distribution, water, wastewater, telecommunications of old-style ones, hardline systems, and a variety of other services that we regulate. We are in a position of stepping forward on advancing how we look at resilience, not only on the movement through transmission, which we are very aggressive on. I serve on one of the state's transmission associations on their board of directors, which goes from Manitoba, Canada, to the Gulf of Mexico and basically up the center of the country. We also look at resilience as not only the ability to withstand pressure on the system, but the ability to bounce back. So we move on efforts in that way. Louisiana still enjoys the lowest electricity rates in the United States. Sometimes we bounce back and forth with one state for first place, but for the most part, we are still the lowest. That also is demonstrated by the advent of the movement of data processing facilities and AI systems that want to move to Louisiana. And they're coming here for two reasons. One, for inexpensive power, but they're also coming here because we are moving them through the process quickly. They're finding a lot of impediment in other states that are keeping them from moving forward. But the good news is, about a year and a half ago, I've been a strong proponent of nuclear since I was in Navy ROTC, since learning and really understanding it. But we have had the ultimate help of the big seven, Alphabet, Amazon, NVIDIA, et cetera, because once they said they wanted it, evidently it was okay. So we're in a position of really accelerating and moving forward on nuclear. If Louisiana establishes itself with half nuclear power and half natural gas power, we will be net zero. And that is an achievable goal in the next 15 to 20 years. We anticipate a request coming to the Commission within the next 3 months of adding in 6,000 megawatts of nuclear power and 6,000 megawatts of new natural gas power. We are working very diligently with the new proponents of the AI folks that they will be paying for all of their generation themselves, which will not be borne by the ratepayers. But as they were just speaking about the federal credit card, somewhere between 50 and 80% of all new nuclear will be paid for by the federal government. There are also some IRS tax credits that will be in position to, if we set this up the right way, may wipe out a significant portion of the remainder of the debt. But we are looking at finance mechanisms where none of the cost while in production, none of the maintenance will be pre-borne by the consumers, but it will be paid for in the regular rate once they plug in. It'll be a pay-to-use basis. I lightheartedly call it rent-to-own furniture. But we will be in a position where they will take care of the maintenance, they will take care of everything, but the ratepayers will simply pay for the power they consume, and over a period of time, the utilities will become the final owner of the device as they accumulate rate base. So we're moving forward on making sure we do this. We have a task force that we have established with the top folks in the nuclear industry. It's called the Louisiana Advanced Nuclear Competitive Edge. They gave it an acronym of LANCE because they liked the way it's spelled. But we are working with the Idaho Nuclear Labs, the Nuclear Energy Institute, the Wyoming Project, BWXT, and a variety of other folks as we accelerate this forward to participate in AP1000s, SMRs, SMR 300s, micro nukes, and even potentially what they call nuclear batteries, which are 15 megawatt or smaller nuclear devices that they would use in hard to reach by transmission. There's a lot more to it, and I could talk about this all day, which I did for the last week in California at a seminar, but I'll move on to the next question.
Well, certainly you've heard from all the panelists. There's a lot of topics, the federal credit card, AI, all things that we want to talk about today. And so let's kick off. A topic that a lot of people in the room and really all over campus and the country have been thinking about, the election. There was an election here. It happened a week and a half ago. And so let's kick off. Rob, with the change in administration, with the change in Congress that has been finalized today, what impact do you think that's going to have on federal energy policy and federal tax policy that's going to impact energy infrastructure and sustainability?
It's a big topic. I can answer it from
2
our
minutes.
perspective. Yeah. I don't know if I can do it in 120 seconds. From Bernhard's standpoint, there are probably two pieces of legislation that we really have our eye on now that we're in the Trump 2.0 era. One is the TCJA, Tax Cuts Jobs Act from 2017. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And then the other one is the elephant in the room, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. So we start with the IRA, which is obviously a sprawling piece of legislation and probably affects everybody in this room who's in the industry to one extent or another. From our sort of corner of the energy transition, the piece of the IRA that we were most focused on was what's called the direct pay provision, which allows a tax-exempt entity to capture the investment tax credit related to battery storage or solar energy, where they otherwise would not have really, at least efficiently, had the ability to do that. So when you go back in time to 2021, when this legislation was first being proposed, I think it was called the Build Back Better Act, and it failed. And then it came back to life in 2022 as the IRA, and obviously was passed into law, I think, in August of that year. So we were watching that very diligently throughout the process, and we were watching that one specific provision, the direct pay provision, and we were keen to see it survive, and because we knew if it did survive, it was going to have a huge impact on our business, given that almost 100% of our customers on the energy as a service side are tax exempt, and it has. We've had a considerable uplift in renewable battery storage and solar projects in the wake of the IRA. So, the question obviously is what happens to it. There seemed to be, let me start by saying, virtually no one I've talked to has suggested that there's going to be an all-out repeal of the legislation. That's just too cumbersome, and there are too many other tools available to Congress. That's an unlikely outcome. So if you kind of accept that premise, there seem to be two sort of camps that have formed. One camp is, and this actually, I had a conversation with a congressman just before the election. I asked him the question, what's the most likely fate of the IRA if Trump wins? And his answer was, well, Congress, if we take, he's a Republican congressman, if we take the House and the Senate, then the most likely thing would be that Congress takes advantage of the reconciliation maneuver, which would allow them to sort of defund the unfunded portions of the IRA, would allow them to bypass a filibuster, would allow them to do that with a simple majority of 51 votes in the Senate instead of 60, which is the same maneuver that I think Obama used to get the Affordable Care Act through years ago. So that's sort of one camp. The other camp, which I believe is a bit more rational, is yes, but you also have to consider the fact that there are a lot of Republican majority states that have benefited disproportionately from the IRA. In fact, I think there were 18 congressmen that recently sent a petition to Mike Johnson asking him to consider leaving in certain provisions of the IRA. And so that camp is saying that it's probably not a sledgehammer but a scalpel. We'll see some surgical changes to the legislation. You may see that some of the bonus provisions within the investment tax credit get removed, like domestic content and so forth. You may see the sunset, which is currently 2032, get pulled in, maybe or accelerated. So, who knows? But what we're just like everybody else in the room. Our job is to adapt. We're trying to adapt, learn everything we can about the new reality every day, and adapt accordingly. And that's certainly what we're doing right now.
Washington politics is always fun to think about. Reading the tea leaves is a dangerous game. But Andy, kind of from a broader perspective, from your perspective in doing long-term planning for MISO, do the generators really need all the tax incentives that the IRA gives? Are they going to continue making the infrastructure investments or not if we lose some of them?
Well, I think the answer to that is that the provisions are there now, and they will take advantage of the provisions as long as they are in the IRA and they are available. The question is, how does this all roll out? I think like an important thing to take into consideration on the ITC and production tax credits are that there are safe harbor provisions. So our developers can take advantage of the safe harbor provisions and still be able to develop a project within 4 years and take advantage of production tax credits and integrated tax credits. The bigger thing that I hear from a lot of our developers is it's not the loss of tax incentives. It's the fact that they spend up to 5 years in an interconnection queue because of a underinvested grid in some places because of grid congestion, as well as transmission owner delays, and that can happen for any number of reasons when you're trying to connect to a transmission owner's grid. There are feasibility issues, there's a lack of communication in some cases, but that is a really big delay right now. And what the incentives are doing right now is de-risking projects, which I don't know if that's exactly the intention, but my feeling on incentives broadly is that they are there to correct certain market dysfunctions and market failures, and offset the risk that are incumbent on different kinds of technologies. I'll also point out the same thing that Rob said. We work in Georgia, and they are benefiting enormously from Inflation Reduction Act tax credits for manufacturing. They will also be benefiting quite a bit from a lot of new solar and energy storage that is being built in Georgia. And then the wind belt in the middle of the country. It's enormously popular to have a production tax credit for wind in Texas and throughout the North Midwest. So I think it's too early to tell, but as it fits in with long-term planning, these tax credits incentives do send a signal in forecasts that certain generation will be more affordable in the future, and therefore there will be more of it. But I don't think it's going to change things too much because we're going to have a lot of load growth, and we're also going to have a lot of demand for clean energy. And these are the cheapest and fastest resources to market when we're talking about solar, wind, and energy storage.
Certainly, having worked in D.C. for a number of years, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Is a good lesson.
I think the other thing, just real quick, the tension between the TCJA, I mean, the whole time on the campaign trail, they're talking about reducing the corporate tax rate to 15%, extending the bonus depreciation out, which is right now scheduled to sunset down to 0 by 2027. So that agenda is, to a large extent, in conflict with the agenda to continue the IRA. Something's got to give. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out in 2025.
Well, and we will all stay tuned to see. Stephen, something that's been big for certainly your office has been the HERO Project. And it'd be great if you can share with everyone a little bit about the HERO Project and whether you think the election is going to have any impact on it or not.
Yeah, so the HERO project has been awarded to the state, so I do not anticipate that that's going to be clawed back in any sort of way. But the HERO project is hubs for energy resilient operations, and it's at its core, it's a microgrid islanding project, right? So for your critical facilities, be they a nursing home or a National Guard base or a shelter, It's solar generation and with battery backup for continuous operations. That is the idea behind the grant. The grant sort of precedes our administration. So we're trying to take a step back and really use this as an opportunity to understand exactly when microgridding and islanding is appropriate in a resilience strategy, right? Because it's not a solution for every single problem. You're still going to need a stronger, more interconnected grid. You're still going to need grid enhancing technologies. You're still going to need better predictive analytics as to where load is going to go down and where those bucket trucks need to be, because we're not all going to be our own power plant. However, it is a solution that is for like for these critical facilities. So what we're doing right now is we're launching a pilot program where we have, I think, 11 representative projects. We're going to get a lot of data, analyze that. The Center for Energy Studies at LSU is going to be the partner for kind of doing the nitty-gritty, both the economics and how does that impact the grid around you when you put one of these islands in the middle of an interconnected grid. In the middle of your distribution system. So we're going to do all of that work and then really open it up to the entire state and innovators like the Bernhards of the world, like our hospitals and all their contractors and servicers and the fun people in advocacy to come with their project ideas that we can then kind of score, analyze, and make sure that we're deploying these dollars correctly. Because like I said, we're not going to have too many opportunities to spend this much money on sort of grid resilience and efficiency. So we have to try to get it right, and we're going to take the time to do that over the next 8 to 9 years.
Well, certainly thinking about grid efficiency and resilience, Eric, something you mentioned in your opening was AI. And AI it's here, it's coming, it's only getting bigger. And so I'd love to hear from the PSC, from your perspective, how is AI going to impact the grid in terms of reliability, in terms of demand, and really everything? What do you see as the future here?
Well, what we've been working on at the commission, in fact, we came up with a plan about 3 years ago called Power Through with Entergy, where we took a 120 megawatt gas-fired power plant, broke it into pieces, and we are working with critical infrastructure, grocery stores, large fuel providers, hospitals, et cetera, where they're putting in generators, sometimes 2 megawatt generators, and that way if we need extra electrons in a region, they'll come on and they'll put electrons in. They'll also be there in case the power goes out, that facility will stay on. But the important part is the host is paying 60% of the cost of that, which means the ratepayers get a brand new 120 megawatt power plant for 60% discount. We took that same analysis and we applied it to what we were going to require from the AI folks. And we've got now currently at least 4 AI systems that are looking at Louisiana. The major one in North Louisiana and 3 moderate-sized ones, when I say moderate, still 1,000 megawatts each, in central Louisiana. Those are coming in, and they will be, by agreement, they will be paying for the construction of their own power plants. The ratepayers will not be paying for them. And we will looking at building out for them to get net zero. We'll get them up within 3 years with new power plants, but within 5 to 6 years, maybe a little bit longer, they'll be matching nuclear power plants. So they will have net zero, they'll be able to wear the sticker, they'll be in that position, because that's their ultimate goal, is to have net zero baseload power. And that's one of the things we have to look at. Louisiana is half the electricity consumed in the state of Louisiana is consumed by the industrial community. They focus on in consuming baseload power. Baseload power is different from renewable energy in a sense of from solar and wind is not baseload power. Batteries are not baseload power. They do not, they're there to provide extra value, but baseload power is there to make sure that these industries receive electricity within 40 and 60 megahertz of power to where they stay in cycle. We all had the experience in the last major hurricane came through New Orleans where we got wiped out with power. I worked on a plan on the go to where I had several cell phones sitting next to each other, and we could not get power in through MISO. So I made an arrangement on the fly with Southern companies where we brought in a power line from the east. We hooked it in through the existing New Orleans power plant, used it as a switch, but we had to sectionalize restoration one little area at a time. Otherwise, we'd blow out the system, and then Bernhard would come out and build a whole new power system for the next 8 months, and nobody would have power. So the problem is, when you have baseload power and the power goes out, the spindle keeps spinning, and it keeps the frequency of power available to industry going. So when we can get the power back on, they can immediately come back on and run, which is what the AI systems want. So if they're running their own systems, which the utilities will be running them for them, that's great. If it goes out, they'll have baseload power through the regular distribution system. So I think that it's going to be a value for the consumer in the long run because A, we're not paying for it, and B, there's no guarantee that businesses last forever. So if these AI systems 10 to 15 years down the road figure out how to take that facility and put it into something the size of a thermos versus a giant building, and their efficiencies great, and we've got these big power plants, Louisiana consumers benefit by having extra power from exporting it to Texas or Arkansas or anywhere, because what people don't realize is for every dollar we export, and if there will be a profit made on it, the utilities don't make the profit. That money comes back to the consumer's fuel charge and reduces it. So it's a giant value to the consumer here to export power.
Exporting my electric bill is totally happy to do.
I'll jump into that on the load growth and the anticipated things from the demand side and from the supply side, and from a policy perspective. Power is kind of unique, and it's the only industry where you just see increasing demand and increasing supply each as liabilities. Right? Whenever the economy's growing and they're building new refineries to put more cars on the road, no one goes, "Oh no, a new refinery! How are we going to pay for that in our gas bill?" You know, it's seen as a good thing, and growth is also seen as a good thing. So I think from the policy perspective, especially in this administration, we're not seeing this as some huge risk or some huge liability. We want to see this as an opportunity for economic growth.
Right, and I can tell you that there is not a tremendous risk on the ratepayer. Like historically, 15, 17 years ago, there was the issue of, quip during the manufacture of a facility. All that's gone now. That's going to be borne by, whether it comes from the federal government or from the financiers, that is not going to be an issue for consumers in the future.
Well, certainly, I want to hear also, Andy and Rob, your perspectives on AI's impact from either your perspective working with MISO or in Bernhard. But let me also remind everyone in the audience, there are QR codes. If you'd like to submit a question for any of the panelists, you can submit it through a QR code, and we'll be taking them after we hear from Andy and Rob, their thoughts on AI in the future for sustainability and smarter infrastructure.
Yeah, I think for us, it's kind of a twofold answer. The most immediate exciting thing is the fact that these data centers are being built at the rate that they're being built. I've never seen anything like this. That market's been growing for some time, largely when it was, you're asking a data center really to handle cloud computing load. And we got involved in it sort of in the mid-teens, have built a number of large data centers, hyperscale data centers for the big four tech firms in Tennessee and Ohio and in different places. So we've got some experience there, but now we're starting to see a lot more opportunities that are in our core geography and our pipeline that are really good jobs, and we're excited about that. We've got the experience, we've got the labor force. We line up really well with that. So that's kind of the immediate. On the other side of the business, energy as a service, it's very interesting to see the effects that this arms race in AI will have on capacity markets and on rates in general. It's interesting to hear Eric talk about it from the context of Louisiana, but PJM up in the Northeast, that capacity auction this past year went up tenfold over the previous auction period. And so when we're thinking about bringing energy as a service to an institutional customer that has a large load, if the value of a megawatt, whether it's a curtailed megawatt or a dispatched megawatt, goes up tenfold, that creates more opportunity for us to bring value to the customer and also make the customer more resilient. So that's interesting. There's also, I think, Eric may be closer to this than I am, but in Ohio, just in the discussion over rates in general, I think the big four sort of have locked horns with AEP over how we're going to handle who's paying for the additional generation that's being built to accommodate all these data centers. AEP's taking the position that the big four should pay for it, and they're kind of in a dispute. So I think we're going to see maybe a little bit more of that. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, we're in a position where everything's flowing rather smoothly here.
Yeah.
But you bring up PJM. PJM just had some issues come up at the FERC, which were they failed in, and PJM is notorious for having odd market auctions and stuff. So
Yeah.
they're not exactly the greatest performer in the country as far as an RTO. But I would think that it's more than just the price of power. It's more than that. It's the ability to move things through the regulatory process quickly.
Yeah.
If you look at Loudoun County, Virginia, which was one of the first targets for AI, they would not put it through because one of the reasons they didn't have enough power, and they were going to be in a position of who's going to get the power when they need it, and they were going to allocate it to the AI system. But where we are here in Louisiana, they can move this project through, and they're moving it through in a matter of months versus a matter of years. And that accelerated process and guarantee of putting your project in place has a certain value proposition to them versus sitting around and arguing over who's going to do what and how they're going to do it, where we've made the deal with them to move in, accelerate. The governor has done a champion job on this about making sure they've got the right locations and the facilities. But again, for a state like Louisiana to have 4 on target right now and not worrying about the quadrant of Midwestern states fighting over who's going to get what,
Yeah.
I don't think we've seen the last AI system coming to Louisiana.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see maybe 2 more. But if you think about the big 7 companies of Alphabet and Amazon, et cetera, Mississippi has Amazon now. But that doesn't mean Amazon's not going to build another one, and they're not going to build more. And that's the problem with electricity. It's the most addictive substance on the planet. People talk about fentanyl. Fentanyl's bad and kills people. Electricity will kill you too. But electricity is the most addictive thing on the planet. And the United States is showing no loss of appetite for increased consumption of electricity. We talk about efficiencies, we talk about everything else. But what we always talk about is how many more power plants can we build? And the way we build power plants and how we finance them and how we remove that burden from consumers versus users in the sense of how do we get it done is now really taking on the focus of how we're going to get this done. It's about the old joke about the romances and the finance. And then you talk about, Professor, about reading the tea leaves. The problem with reading the tea leaves in Washington is when you get to the bottom of the cup, you look like you're going on a long journey, right? And that's the problem with balancing off this federal and local sort of application of access into the grid.
Well, I certainly also want to be able to give you, Andy, a period to comment on AI and what do you see? MISO is not PJM, perhaps thankfully, but...
I mean, it's not PJM, but it's not. It's got its own faults for sure, and we have our challenges. Like I mentioned with the interconnection queue, this acceleration of load growth has been unprecedented. Everybody was talking about the era of flat load growth for the last decade, and it's happening so quickly, and at the same time we are facing a backlog in the interconnection queue, and this is a really huge challenge. And just thinking about what's commercially ready is really important to this discussion.
I want to offer you a 30-second ad in that because I had a big meeting with MISO where we almost went to fisticuffs over the table on this. But they are putting a cap on the interconnect, on the queue. They are talking about getting it cleared out in 12 months and then opening it back up again. So
in the next 3 years.
Well,
yeah.
That means the next 3 years.
Yeah.
But when it says 12 months. But we are going to be putting extra pressure on MISO because MISO is trying to put an extra $300 billion in transmission costs, spreading a lot of that on Louisiana. We've got $1 billion coming up next year, and that's just 2.1.
$30 billion.
Well, it's $30 billion
like
for
it is
across
for
the
the
system.
North Midwest.
$1 billion will
Yeah.
be in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas.
There is no price tag. There's no.
We saw it
transmission
at the
plan that is
ERSC meeting 2 days ago. So that's where they're coming
I've
out with.
been in
right,
talks with
right.
the staff.
So that's the real
Sorry.
issue is that this whole MISO problem is
Yeah.
they don't really listen to the states. They'll tell you they listen, but they move the goal line every time. So there is a movement now amongst the 5 southern elements of MISO to come in January and really hold MISO their feet to the fire. So we're moving hard on that.
If I could just continue.
Sure, sorry.
the problem with just meeting the demand with the data centers is it's truly a challenge, because when you add new load to the grid, it creates a gravitational pull. When you're thinking about long-term planning needs, this could create congestion. It could create load pockets where there's limited import capability. And I think the name of the game here is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't look at just one kind of generation type. Look at a diversity of options. And that can be achieved through a broader network, through a network that can connect to better priced resources, evening out market prices over a larger distance. And it can also create very, very much needed redundancy too. Eric mentioned Hurricane Ida. That's a special circumstance. You can't predict where hurricanes are going to happen, but you can predict to some degree when there are going to be extreme events, like in February and January. And we experienced power outages because of constraints on the grid and inability to import power, because there were pretty sizable power outages with respect to gas plants that couldn't start up or they couldn't access gas. So when you have a diversity of options, you have a little bit of redundancy, and it's very good for the grid to be able to move power unobstructed.
And we do have a grid resilience program from GRIP called 4101D coming out in the state. I just want to let people be aware of that because it's a competitive at the state level. We'll issue it through the Office of Energy, but we're looking for proposals from our utilities, from our municipal partners, and from nonprofits as to some of these innovative solutions that can make the grid more resilient in the face of some of the issues that we've seen. So when you think of those end-of-the-line coastal communities that are probably really hard to get the power back on after a storm, we're hoping that they come forward with some innovative ideas.
There is also a full panel this afternoon at 3:15 on AI and energy. So if you are interested in furthering this conversation, you can stay and listen to that panel. We have a little bit of time left to see if there are questions. If there is a question from the audience.
Yes. Louisiana's maritime sector is betting big on offshore wind. How is the grid prepared to accept that intermittent power?
Andy, do you want to take a shot at it?
Well, we're not currently. There has been no studies as to what upgrades are needed to be able to handle the injections onshore, or where those points of interconnection are. And our developers are interested, but there's not as much interest where there isn't significant headroom. And I do think that there's promise with MISO's long-range transmission planning effort, which Eric had mentioned, in upping the capacity, upping the injection capacity that can be handled by the grid. And I think that that's an important thing to uplift for decision makers, that this is an option for Louisiana, and this is maybe a focus area for MISO because it can provide additional resource adequacy benefits.
Stephen from the governor's office, something more positive than we're not ready yet?
So well, it is definitely not ready yet on the interconnection side.
What?
There's really no place for that power to come ashore, which is a problem they'll have to work through. We are embarking right now on an offshore energy roadmap planning process through the Office of Energy. But we're also going to be cautious. I came from the marine industry myself. I was a marine construction contractor for 8 years prior to coming to the governor's office. We were always very hopeful about the prospect of offshore wind, and I know our workers in Port Fourchon and Cameron and all those other places are ready to get to work on these projects, and we have that workforce. But we do have to also keep protecting our consumer, and the pricing and the economics have to make sense if we're gonna ask our ratepayers to pay for offshore wind as a resource.
Well, this has been an exciting panel. Thank you so much to our panelists, Rob, Andy, Stephen, and Eric. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today on smarter energy infrastructure and for a sustainable future. Thank you to all of the audience participation, and thank you for sharing your time with the Tulane Energy Forum here. There's an exciting rest of the day today and tomorrow of events. We hope you'll stay with us to learn more about energy and where we are going in the future. Thank you so much.